Welcome to Spring 2021 Area Fellowships. We're grateful that we can still gather. We know this is not how we intend. We know this is really not what we want for Area Fellowships. But we're grateful that we can fellowship at any time, in any way possible. And so I know we're having to do these over Zoom, we're having to do them remotely, but it's good to be together, even remotely. It's good to see your faces, and it's good to see one another again, even if it has to be on Zoom. And so we still get together, and we still come to discuss our church and where we are right now. You know, not long before I came to the First Baptist Church of San Antonio, there was great care given to this wall behind me. You know, in a nod to the past, we found these pictures to tell a story of our history as a church in downtown San Antonio. And I marvel at these every time I walk by. And from these early pictures of our building, to the construction of our sanctuary, to the baptisms in San Pedro Park, we have a distinctly San Antonio history that's helped shape us into the church that we are today. God graciously takes the believers of the local body and builds them up through time into something holy and unique. And our story melds together the gospel and the Riverwalk. It marks the heart of Bexar County with a steeple that points people directly to God. And this church has been faithfully pointing people to God's kingdom for 160 years now. And this is a wonderful privilege and responsibility that's been placed in our laps by our God above. You know, this is why we're intentionally celebrating our 160th birthday all year long. We need to remember these stories of faithful service and the stories of faithful servants and let them stir in our hearts so that we can serve well in the days ahead. Now, our story's amazing. One, as we think back over our history, it's amazing that it took so long to get a Baptist church in San Antonio. In fact, if you look back at the website of the First Baptist Church of Gonzales, Texas, they say on their website that they helped start our church, and they did, but they point to 1877. And what happened was, we say we started about 16 years earlier, which is when we first begun with our first missionary pastor. But those first 16 years of the early church were a struggle. We struggled to get off the ground because the church was hit and deeply impacted by the Civil War. The church had no money, we had no building, and people were dwindling. But you know, what you see in these pictures behind me were that our faithful believers in the First Baptist Church of San Antonio didn't give up in those 16 years. But we see the story of faith unfolding in these pictures. That our mothers and fathers in the faith persevered through the Civil War. They kept on the work of the gospel, and God blessed their efforts. And we want to build on those efforts. We want to see something mighty happen in our city today. You know, as we look back, we've seen great things happen through the years. The grand vision of building a stunning sanctuary in 1925, or having the foresight 50 years ago to begin a weekly live broadcast on KSAT 12. We've planted churches all over the city. You know, we have served the needs of the city from day one. Our first pastor, John Hermodius Thurman, worked tirelessly providing aid to the city during the Civil War. It's in our DNA to serve this city well for the sake of the kingdom of God. And so what's our story going to be? Where is this story going to continue? We've been given this great history that's behind us. And you know, the Lord is preparing us for something great as we come out of this pandemic. Are we going to be ready? Are you going to be ready? Or am I going to be ready for what's next? You know, as I think about our history and I look at this wall behind me, of all that we've been given, and the rich history that we have, I'm reminded of Luke 12, 43 through 48. And you'll know this when we get to the end. It starts, "Blessed is the slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But, and this is who we don't want to be in 45, but if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time coming, and he begins to beat his slaves with the men and women, he eats and drinks and gets drunk, the master will come on a day he doesn't expect, at an hour he doesn't know, and will cut him into pieces, assign him a place with the unbelievers. And that slave who knew his master's will and didn't get ready and didn't act in accordance with his will receive many lashes. And the one who didn't know it and committed deeds worthy of a flogging will receive a few. Now this is who we need to be. But from everyone who has been given much, like us, much is required. And of whom they have entrusted much, of them they will ask all the more. And as we think about our story and our history, we've been given much as a church. We've been entrusted with much in the gospel. And we need to be ready to serve this city well. You know, during the transition with Pastor Don Guthrie, it was clear that we had a new question to answer as a church. You know, one of the reasons that Don knew that it was time to retire was the church was finally healthy. It took 23 years to bring the church back to her health. But in 23 years, Don Guthrie served us well, and we were finally able to be just healthy as a church. And then it was my time to serve as pastor here. And we knew that God was changing our focus. That instead of looking inward, instead of circling the wagons, instead of trying to get us well, it was now time to get back to serving the city for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, now that we're healthy, we need to ask the question, what do healthy churches do? What does it look like when a healthy church enacts the gospel of Jesus Christ? You know, we've already been able to do some amazing things together. One of the things we're able to do is complete 4th Street Crossing, where we not only house weekly worship, but we've been able to host the San Antonio Police Department. We've been able to briefly use it as a warming shelter for the homeless. And we're going to continue to use that space for the city so that we might serve well. You know, we've also finally been able to rid our corner of the city of this seedy element that was living in our parking lot. That the hotel that was once overrun with drug dealers and prostitutes is now a blank canvas for the church. It's a blank canvas for the kingdom of God. And these kinds of milestones, they're visual representations of progress. And they're tremendous assets that we never need to take for granted. But even those assets pale in comparison to the people of the church. In fact, you are the greatest asset in the local church. As phenomenal as our property is, the real legacy is in our obedience to Jesus Christ. Like all these people behind us who persevered through the Civil War, who persevered through the Great Depression, who persevered through the great world wars and still remained faithful to the Lord. That's who we want to be. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if our legacy together was as a people who were obedient to Jesus Christ? That we lived out the texts and commands of Jesus fully in the Spirit for the sake of the kingdom of God. And in those ways, wouldn't it be wonderful if our city was turned upside down, like when the Apostle Paul visited Thessalonica? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our legacy wasn't in buildings, but our legacy was in a revival in the heart of San Antonio? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we saw a movement of God unlike any other coming out of this pandemic? And for that to be our legacy, this only happens as we faithfully and obediently follow Jesus Christ. Each one of us, as individual members of the church, committing to be repentant, committing to witness, committing to disciple. You know, I know it's hard to see from far away, but our legacy is being lived out right now in your homes as you obey Jesus Christ. The pandemic hasn't stopped this. And in fact, it's accelerated this. And so we live this out together for the sake of the kingdom of God. And so we hope you'll take some time to visit with your area fellowship group, to think about these kinds of things, to think about our legacy as a church, to celebrate our 160 years together. In fact, we have some questions, and you can talk about those things, or you can let these questions help shape those. In fact, if your host will begin to take us through these 3 questions, and we can't wait to hear your discussion about our church and our legacy and the gospel of Jesus Christ.